Hello, math friends. This is MAT 0028, section 3.2, the U-try problems. So let's get started. Letter A deals with factoring by grouping. That's what this whole section is about. And the first two problems here have already been halfway done for you. In other words, they've already factored out a common factor. Like in the first one, they factored out the z and the -8. And so what's left was the c plus 5 and 5 plus c. Now what you need to realize is that what's in the parentheses is exactly the same on this problem. C plus 5 and 5 plus c are the same thing. So that is your greatest common factor. So that's going to come out front as c plus 5, or you could put 5 plus c, it doesn't matter. And then you're going to put a parentheses just like we did in the last section, and we're going to put the common factor up underneath each term and divide it by the common factor, just like we did back in section 3.1. Okay, and I'm going to show you a shortcut for this in just a second. So on the first term, the c plus 5's cancel, and you're just left with z, okay? And then you bring down, you go to the next term, and the 5 plus c and c plus 5 cancel, and you're just left with -8. So what happens is your answer looks like a FOIL problem, okay? So let me show you the shortcut that we're going to use on these type problems from now on. If you started with the same problem, okay, and you have the terms that are in the parentheses are exactly the same, then you bring the parentheses out front, okay? So that's your GCF. That's a C, that goes out front, and you put a parentheses, and whatever's left over outside, starting from the left, because it's a leftover, get it? Is a bad joke. I can't hear you laughing. Okay, whatever. We move on. You start with the left term right there, z, and come over to the second parentheses, -8, and that's what goes in the other parentheses. So it's GCF in the first parentheses and leftovers in the second parentheses. And that's how you can do your factoring by grouping, okay? So it just saves you a little bit of time, that's all. Now look at letter B here. It's still been factored once because you've got a minus b in the parentheses, but on the other one it's b minus a. Those are not the same because of the subtraction sign. So these are exact opposites of each other, and this is a really weird problem. What you want to do is when you see that they're opposites, we've got a positive a in the first parentheses, negative a in the second, negative b, positive b, so they're opposites. We need to get the second parentheses to look the same as the first one, as a minus b. So when you see that they're exact opposites, you're going to think -1, okay? So exact opposites, you're going to use a -1. So here's what happens. We keep the first parentheses exactly the same, okay? Bring down the negative x, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor a -1 out of the second set of parentheses. So I can factor a 1 out of anything in the world because it doesn't change it. If you divide by 1, it stays the same. But if I use a negative, what it's going to do is it's going to change the signs. So instead of them being exact opposites, they're going to become exactly the same. Crazy, huh? So here's what happens. When you divide those two terms by a -1, what you get is negative b, and a negative over a negative, positive a. Okay, so it still doesn't look the same. Still looks disgusting, okay? Keep the first one the same, 3 and a minus b. Now, one thing you want to do, you want to tidy up this mess out in front of the parentheses. So you want to multiply those two terms. Negative x times -1 is a positive x. So that just gives it much nice, neater, simpler term right there. Now, negative b plus a can also be written as a minus b, because the a is positive and the b is negative. You just flip the order, but it's still the same signs up there. So now we've got what we want because the parentheses are exactly the same. So that is our common factor that comes out front, a minus b, and you put the leftovers in the other parentheses, 3 plus the x. and that goes in the second set of parentheses. So when you're done with the grouping problem, your answer should look like a FOIL problem. Okay, that's the whole idea there. And if they're not the same, you need to use the -1 to factor that out to make them become the same so that you can factor them by grouping. All right, let's look at the next one. So here, these two are factoring problems that by grouping that have not been started for us at all. So one thing that tells you you're going to definitely have to use grouping is 4 terms. And if you look at letter C, you've got 4 terms in that problem. So we're going to group the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. Okay? So look at just the first 2 terms because we did not have a common factor all the way through. That's why we have to do this other type of factoring. We have in the first 2 terms a common factor of 3y. Okay, so if we go back and divide by 3y on just those first 2 terms, the 3's cancel, the x is going to come down, and the y's cancel. So we just have x. Bring down the minus sign, and then 9 divided by 3 is 3, and the y's cancel. Okay, so the first parentheses is x minus 3. Now, whatever sign, notice I left that sign between the 2 middle terms just hanging out there. That just comes straight down. Okay, that's a pitiful plus sign, but anyway. All right, plus the common factor in the last 2 terms is 2. So bring the 2 out front, then divide by 2. So the 2's cancel, and we have x minus 6 divided by 2 is 3. Okay, now you ask yourself, what's for dinner? No, you don't. You ask yourself, are the parentheses the same? Yes, x minus 3 and x minus 3, those are the same. That comes out front, x minus 3, and your leftovers, see all this talk of leftovers making me hungry, would be 3y plus 2. And there's your answer. Okay? All right, letter D, and I think this is the last one. So hopefully you'll get lots of practice on the homework because they didn't give you a whole bunch of U-tries. So once again, there's no GCF all the way through. So I'm going to group the first 2 and the last 2. So we got to be careful because that sign in the middle is a negative. That's going to make a difference here. Look at 8S and 12R. 4 will go into both of those. Okay, but S and R are not the same. So just 4 is your common factor. So go back and divide by 4. That's going to give me 2s, and then 12 divided by 4 would be 3r. So that comes down. Okay? Now, since there's a minus sign hanging out in the middle, we bring that down. Okay, just like we did with the plus sign on the last one. The common factor between 6 and 9 would be 3. And there's not an r in both terms, but there is an s, and the smallest exponent is just s. Okay, so that comes out. Now, here's the tricky part. When you go to put your common factor back up for the second 2 terms, that negative sign now goes with the 3. So what you're going to divide by is negative 3s on both of those terms. Very important to keep that sign. So 2 negatives here, the negative 6s squared and negative 3s, 2 negatives is going to be a positive 2. And when you subtract the s's, you get s, okay? And over here, a negative divided by a negative is positive 3, and the s's cancel, but we're left with r. So that's your second set of parentheses. And if you look, yay, we're on the right track. The parentheses are the same. So that comes out front, 2s plus 3r. And your leftovers go in the other parentheses, 4 minus 3s. You're just picking up what's outside the 2 parentheses for your leftovers. And that is it for 3.2. Good luck with that homework and quiz.